They said she was pregnant at 65. The truth is even more disturbing. Halima Khan grew up in a small, vibrant Pakistani-American community in Dearborn, Michigan. Her family, devout Muslims, had emigrated from Lahore when she was just a toddler, seeking a better life and greater opportunities in America. They settled in a modest two-story house on a tree-lined street, surrounded by other immigrant families who shared their language, their culture, and their faith. Halima was a strikingly beautiful child, with large, expressive brown eyes, long dark hair, and a smile that could light up a room. But her beauty was more than skin deep. She possessed a gentle spirit, a kind heart, and a deep devotion to her family and her faith. She spent her childhood immersed in the traditions of her culture. She learned to read and write Urdu, attended Quran classes at the local mosque, and helped her mother prepare traditional Pakistani dishes. She excelled in school, her quick mind and diligent work ethic earning her praise from her teachers. But her greatest joy was spending time with her parents. She adored her father, a hard-working man who owned a small grocery store, and her mother, a gentle and loving woman who dedicated her life to her family. She listened attentively to their stories, learned from their wisdom, and strived to embody the values they instilled in her: honesty, integrity, compassion, and respect for others. From a young age, Halima understood the importance of family, the sacred bond between parents and children. She witnessed the love and respect that her parents showed to their own elders, and she vowed to do the same. She received numerous marriage proposals, even as a teenager. Young men from the community, and even from back in Pakistan, were drawn to her beauty, her intelligence, and her virtuous character. But Halima never considered any of them. She had made a promise to her parents that she would only marry a man they chose for her, a man who would honor her family and uphold their traditions. She trusted their judgment, their wisdom, their love for her. She knew that they would only choose a man who was worthy of her, a man who would cherish her and provide for her. And so, she waited, patiently and faithfully, for the day when her parents would introduce her to her future husband. Her life was full of prospect, but her dedication to her family made her put aside her personal dream. This first part introduces Halima and establishes her background, her values, and her devotion to her family and faith. The setting is established, and the cultural context is introduced. The emphasis is on Halima's virtuous character and her commitment to honoring her parents' wishes, setting the stage for the arranged marriage that will shape her future. When Halima turned 22, her parents began the serious search for a suitable husband. It was a process they approached with great care and deliberation. They consulted with family elders, community leaders, and religious scholars, seeking guidance and recommendations. They received numerous proposals, each accompanied by photographs, family histories, and detailed descriptions of the prospective groom's character, education, and financial prospects. They carefully reviewed each proposal, weighing the pros and cons, considering the compatibility of the families, and seeking divine guidance through prayer. Finally, they narrowed down the list to a handful of candidates. They arranged for discreet inquiries to be made, gathering information about the young men's reputations, their personalities, and their families' standing within the community. One name kept rising to the top of the list: Yasin Mia. He was a young man from a respectable family, known for his kindness, his piety, and his strong work ethic. He had a stable job as an accountant at a local firm, and he owned a small, modest home. Halima's parents arranged for a meeting with Yasin and his family. The meeting took place at Halima's home, a formal and somewhat awkward affair, with both families dressed in their finest clothes and observing the traditional customs of their culture. Halima, veiled and demure, served tea and sweets to the guests, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She stole glances at Yasin, noticing his kind eyes, his gentle smile, and his respectful demeanor. Yasin, too, was struck by Halima's beauty and her grace. He had heard about her reputation for piety and kindness, and he was impressed by her intelligence and her quiet confidence. The two families exchanged pleasantries, discussed their backgrounds, and assessed each other's suitability. After a few hours, Yasin's family departed, leaving Halima's parents to deliberate. Later that evening, Halima's parents called her into the living room. They sat her down, their faces serious but filled with love. "Halima, my dear," her father began, his voice gentle, we have met with Yassin Mia and his family. They are good people, from a respectable background. And Yassin, he seems like a kind and honorable young man." Halima lowered her gaze, her heart beating faster. She knew what was coming. "We believe," her mother continued, "that he would be a good husband for you, a good provider, a good companion, and a good father to your future children." Her father placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "What do you say, my daughter? Do you agree to this proposal?" Halima, her mind swirling with emotions, took a deep breath. She trusted her parents implicitly. She knew that they had her best interests at heart. She had always dreamed of a loving marriage, a happy family, and a life filled with faith and devotion. "Yes, Abba," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I agree." And so, the arrangements were made. The wedding date was set, the preparations began, and Halima's life took a new and momentous turn. The arranged marriage is a key element of the story, reflecting the cultural context and Halima's commitment to her family's traditions. The meeting between the families is described in detail, highlighting the formality and the importance of parental approval. Halima's acceptance of the proposal underscores her trust in her parents and her desire for a traditional marriage. Halima and Yassin's wedding was a grand affair, a celebration of love, family, and tradition. The mosque was filled with relatives, friends, and members of the community, all dressed in their finest clothes, their faces beaming with joy. Halima, radiant in a traditional red and gold bridal outfit, her hands adorned with intricate henna designs, looked like a princess. Yassin, handsome and dignified in a traditional sherwani, gazed at her with adoration and respect. The ceremony was performed according to Islamic rites, with prayers, blessings, and the recitation of verses from the Quran. The air was filled with a sense of reverence, of sacredness, of the joining of two souls in a bond blessed by God. After the ceremony, the newlyweds were showered with rice and rose petals, symbols of prosperity and happiness. They were greeted with hugs, congratulations, and well wishes from their families and friends. The reception was a lavish feast, with tables laden with traditional Pakistani dishes, biryani, kebabs, curries, and a dazzling array of sweets. The music was lively, the dancing was energetic, and the atmosphere was filled with joy and celebration. Halima and Yassin, though initially shy and reserved, gradually relaxed and began to enjoy the festivities. They exchanged smiles, whispered words of affection, and held hands, their fingers intertwined, a symbol of their newfound connection. They moved into Yassin's small, modest home, a place that Halima quickly transformed into a haven of warmth and love. She decorated the walls with Islamic calligraphy, filled the rooms with the aroma of her cooking, and created a space where Yassin felt cherished and supported. Their marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared faith, and a deep, abiding love. They prayed together, read the Quran together, and supported each other through life's ups and downs. Yassin was a kind and gentle husband, always attentive to Halima's needs, always treating her with respect and affection. He worked hard to provide for her, and he encouraged her to pursue her interests and her passions. Halima, in turn, was a devoted and loving wife. She took care of their home, cooked delicious meals, and created a warm and welcoming environment for Yassin. She supported his career, encouraged his ambitions, and offered him unwavering love and companionship. They were happy, truly happy. Their life together was not without its challenges, but their love for each other and their shared faith gave them the strength to overcome any obstacle. They had found in each other a soulmate, a partner, a friend, and a lover. Their greatest desire, however, remained unfulfilled, the blessing of a child. The description of the wedding and the early years of Halima and Yassin's marriage establishes their loving relationship and their shared values. It emphasizes the importance of faith and tradition in their lives, and it sets the stage for the eventual arrival of their son, Ruth. The details of their daily life create a sense of warmth and intimacy, making their later struggles all the more poignant. After 5 years of marriage, Halima and Yassin were blessed with the arrival of a son. They named him Maruf Hassan, a name that meant renowned and good. He was a beautiful baby, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle smile. His birth was a joyous occasion, celebrated by the entire family and community. Halima and Yasim were overjoyed, their hearts filled with a love so profound, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to their eyes. They showered Maruf with affection, doting on him, caring for his every need, and marveling at his every milestone. They watched him grow from a helpless infant into a curious toddler, then into a playful and energetic young boy. Halima, who had always longed for a large family, found her purpose and her fulfillment in motherhood. She dedicated herself to raising Maruf, instilling in him the values of her faith, the importance of education, and the respect for elders that she had learned from her own parents. Yasim, too, was a devoted father. He worked hard to provide for his family, but he always made time for Maruf, playing with him, reading to him, and teaching him about the world. They enrolled Maruf in the best schools, encouraged his academic pursuits, and supported his extracurricular activities. They wanted him to have every opportunity to reach his full potential and to become a successful and responsible member of society. They also taught him the importance of faith, taking him to the mosque regularly, teaching him to pray, and instilling in him a deep love and respect for God. Maruf grew into a bright, intelligent, and well-mannered young man. He excelled in his studies, he was popular with his peers, and he was respectful to his elders. He was the pride and joy of his parents, the embodiment of their hopes and dreams. But as Maruf grew older, a subtle shift began to occur in his personality. He became more independent, more assertive, and more influenced by the world outside his home. He started to question the traditional values of his parents, to challenge their authority, and to seek his own path. Halima and Yasim, while proud of his independence, also worried about him. They saw the temptations and the dangers of the modern world, and they feared that he might stray from the path of righteousness. They tried to guide him, to counsel him, but they also recognized that he was becoming a man, and that he had to make his own choices. The arrival of Maruf and his upbringing are described in detail, highlighting the love and dedication of his parents. The subtle shift in Maruf's personality as he grows older foreshadows the later conflict and the betrayal that will devastate Halima. The emphasis on traditional values and the parents' concerns about the modern world add depth to the narrative. As Maruf entered his teenage years, the cultural gap between him and his parents became more pronounced. He was an American teenager, immersed in the popular culture of his peers, exposed to influences that Halima and Yasim struggled to understand. He wanted to fit in, to be accepted, to be cool. He started to spend more time with his friends, less time at home. He became interested in girls, in music, in fashion, in all the things that typical teenagers are interested in. Halima and Yasim, while wanting him to be happy, also worried about him losing his way. They tried to maintain a balance between allowing him freedom and setting boundaries, between respecting his individuality and upholding their traditional values. They had many conversations with him, sometimes heated, sometimes tearful, about the importance of education, the dangers of drugs and alcohol, the sanctity of marriage, and the respect for elders. Maruf, often rebellious and resistant, would argue with his parents, accusing them of being old-fashioned, out of touch, and overly controlling. He would push back against their rules, testing their limits, and asserting his independence. But despite the conflicts, the underlying love and respect between them remained. Maruf, deep down, knew that his parents cared about him, that they wanted what was best for him. He might not always agree with their methods, but he never doubted their love. Halima, in particular, had a special bond with her son. She was his confidant, his advisor, his emotional anchor. He would often come to her with his problems, his worries, his hopes and dreams. She would listen patiently, offer words of wisdom, and pray for him, her heart filled with a mother's unconditional love. As Maruf approached adulthood, Halima and Yasim began to think about his future. They wanted him to go to college, to get a good job, and to have a successful and fulfilling life. They also, according to their tradition, started to consider finding him a suitable wife. They knew that Maruf might resist the idea of an arranged marriage, that he might prefer to choose his own partner. But they hoped that he would respect their wishes, that he would understand the importance of family and tradition. The challenges of raising Maruf as a teenager in a culturally different environment are explored, highlighting the generational gap and the conflicts that arise. The underlying love and respect between Maruf and his parents are emphasized, despite the disagreements and rebellions. The parents' desire to find him a suitable wife sets the stage for the next phase of the story. The search for a suitable wife for Maruf was a delicate and complex process. Halima and Yasim wanted a woman who was not only beautiful and virtuous but also came from a good family, shared their religious values, and would be a loving and supportive partner for their son. They consulted with relatives, friends, and community leaders, seeking recommendations and discreetly inquiring about potential candidates. They received numerous proposals, each accompanied by photographs and detailed descriptions of the young woman's family background, education, and personal qualities. Halima, with her keen eye for detail and her deep understanding of human nature, carefully reviewed each proposal. She looked beyond the superficial qualities, searching for signs of kindness, intelligence, and a genuine commitment to family and faith. She narrowed down the list to a few promising candidates, and then, with Yasim's approval, she arranged for meetings with the young women and their families. These meetings were formal and chaperoned, following the traditional customs of their culture. One young woman, in particular, stood out: Sarah Ahmed. She was the daughter of a respected doctor and a homemaker, a family known for their piety and their generosity. She was beautiful, intelligent, and well-mannered. She had a degree in education, and she expressed a desire to be a stay-at-home mother. Halima was immediately drawn to Sarah's gentle nature, her respectful demeanor, and her genuine interest in Maruf. She saw in her a potential daughter-in-law who would bring joy and harmony to their family. Maruf, initially reluctant about the arranged marriage process, was also impressed by Sarah. He found her attractive, intelligent, and engaging. He appreciated her traditional values, and he saw in her a woman who would be a loving wife and a devoted mother. After several meetings, and with the blessings of both families, Maruf and Sarah agreed to the marriage. They were both attracted to each other, and they shared a common vision for their future, a life built on faith, family, and mutual respect. The process of finding a wife for Maruf is described in detail, highlighting the cultural and religious considerations. The introduction of Sarah, the daughter-in-law, is crucial, as she will play a significant role in the later events of the story. Maruf's initial acceptance of the arranged marriage and his positive impression of Sarah sets up a contrast with his later behavior. Maruf and Sarah's wedding was a joyous occasion, a celebration of love, family, and new beginnings. It was a traditional Pakistani-American wedding, filled with vibrant colors, delicious food, lively music, and the blessings of family and friends. Halima and Yasim were overjoyed to see their son happily married, embarking on a new chapter in his life. They welcomed Sarah into their family with open arms, treating her like a daughter, showering her with love and affection. The newlyweds moved into a small apartment, not far from Halima and Yasim's home. Maruf continued to work at his job, now as a junior executive at a technology company, while Sarah initially focused on setting up their new home. The first few years of their marriage were filled with happiness and contentment. They adjusted to married life, learning to navigate the challenges and joys of living together, building a foundation of love, trust, and mutual respect. Sarah proved to be a loving and devoted wife. She was supportive of Maruf's career, she took care of their home, and she embraced the traditions of his family. She quickly bonded with Halima, forming a close and affectionate relationship. Halima, in turn, treated Sarah like her own daughter. She shared her wisdom, her recipes, and her stories. She taught her the traditions of their culture, and she offered her guidance and support. They often visited Halima and Yasim, sharing meals, celebrating holidays, and spending quality time together. The two families were close, their bond strengthened by the marriage of their children. Maruf, initially happy and content in his marriage, seemed to be fulfilling his parents' dreams. He was a successful young man, a loving husband, and a devoted son. He seemed to have embraced the traditional values they had instilled in him. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family life, subtle tensions were beginning to emerge. Sarah, while outwardly compliant and respectful, harbored a growing resentment towards Halima. She felt that Halima was too involved in their lives, too controlling, too demanding. She wanted to establish her own independence, to create her own home, to make her own decisions. She felt stifled by the constant presence of her mother-in-law, by the expectations of the extended family, and by the traditions that she found increasingly restrictive. These tensions were not immediately apparent, but they simmered beneath the surface, slowly eroding the harmony of the family. Maruf, caught in the middle, tried to balance his loyalty to his mother with his love for his wife. It was a delicate balancing act, one that would become increasingly difficult to maintain. The description of Maruf and Sarah's early married life establishes an initial period of happiness and stability, creating a contrast with the later deterioration of their relationship. The subtle tensions between Sarah and Halima are foreshadowed, hinting at the future conflict and the challenges that lie ahead. Despite the underlying tensions, the first 5 years of Maruf and Sarah's marriage were, for the most part, happy and fulfilling. They established a comfortable routine, built a strong social network, and enjoyed the companionship of their families and friends. Sarah, after a year of settling into married life, decided to pursue her passion for teaching. She secured a position at a local elementary school, teaching 3rd grade. She loved her job, finding fulfillment in nurturing young minds and making a positive impact on her students' lives. Maruf continued to advance in his career, receiving promotions and accolades for his hard work and dedication. He was a rising star in his company, respected by his colleagues and admired by his superiors. They traveled, explored new places, and enjoyed the freedoms and opportunities that their dual-income household afforded them. They purchased a larger home, a spacious 2-story house in a desirable suburb, a symbol of their success and their growing prosperity. They also started talking about having children. Sarah, initially hesitant about becoming a mother, had gradually warmed to the idea. She saw how much joy Maruf brought to his parents, and she began to yearn for a child of her own. However, conceiving proved to be more difficult than they had anticipated. They tried for several months, then a year, then 2 years, without success. The disappointment began to weigh on them, adding another layer of stress to their lives. Halima, noticing their sadness, offered words of encouragement and prayers. She reminded them that God's timing was perfect, that they should have faith and patience. She also suggested that they consult a doctor to rule out any underlying medical issues. Maruf and Sarah, initially reluctant to seek medical intervention, eventually agreed. They underwent a series of tests, which revealed that Sarah had a minor hormonal imbalance that was affecting her fertility. The doctor prescribed medication, and after a few months of treatment, Sarah became pregnant. The news was greeted with joy and celebration by both families. Halima and Yasim were ecstatic at the prospect of becoming grandparents. But the pregnancy, while a blessing, also added another layer of complexity to the already simmering tensions between Sarah and Halima. Sarah, experiencing the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy, became more sensitive, more demanding, and more resentful of Halima's perceived interference. The seemingly happy family period is described, but with subtle hints of underlying issues: Sarah's initial hesitation about motherhood, the difficulty conceiving, and the continued tension with Halima. The pregnancy, while a joyous event, is also presented as a potential catalyst for further conflict. This section adds depth and realism to the narrative, showing that even seemingly perfect families have their challenges. Tragedy struck 5 years into Maruf and Sarah's marriage. Yasim, Halima's beloved husband and Maruf's father, suffered a sudden and fatal heart attack. He was only 68 years old, still relatively young and active. His death was a devastating blow to the entire family. Halima was inconsolable, her grief overwhelming. She had lost her partner, her soulmate, the man she had loved for over 4 decades. Maruf, too, was deeply affected by his father's death. He had always been close to his father, looking up to him as a role model and a source of strength and guidance. He felt a profound sense of loss, a void in his life that could never be filled. Sarah, while sympathetic to their grief, found herself in an awkward position. She had not known Yasim as long as the others, and her relationship with him had always been somewhat formal. She tried to be supportive, but she also felt a sense of detachment from their overwhelming sorrow. The funeral was a large and somber affair, attended by hundreds of people from the community. Halima, dressed in black, her face veiled, sat silently, her eyes filled with tears. Maruf stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, offering support but also struggling with his own grief. After the funeral, Halima moved in with Maruf and Sarah. It was the traditional thing to do, the expectation within their culture. But it also added another layer of complexity to the already strained relationship between Sarah and her mother-in-law. Halima, weakened by grief and age, became increasingly dependent on Maruf and Sarah. She needed help with daily tasks, with meals, with medication. She was no longer the strong, independent woman she had once been. Sarah, already resentful of Halima's presence, found herself burdened with the added responsibility of caring for her elderly mother-in-law. She felt trapped, overwhelmed, and increasingly frustrated. Maruf, torn between his love for his mother and his loyalty to his wife, struggled to navigate the increasingly tense situation. He tried to mediate, to appease both women, but his efforts often seemed to make things worse. The death of Yasim is a major turning point in the story. It creates a significant shift in the family dynamics, exacerbating the existing tensions and setting the stage for the tragic events that follow. The cultural expectation of Halima moving in with Maruf and Sarah adds another layer of complexity to the situation. The months following Yasim's death were a period of profound decline for Halima. The grief, combined with her advancing age and underlying health issues, took a heavy toll on her body and mind. She became increasingly frail, her movements slow and unsteady. She lost her appetite, her weight dropping dramatically. She spent most of her days sitting in a chair by the window, staring blankly at the outside world, lost in her memories. She also began to experience cognitive decline. She would forget things, repeat herself, and sometimes become confused about where she was or who people were. She would occasionally call out for Yasim, her voice filled with a heartbreaking mixture of longing and confusion. Maruf, witnessing his mother's decline, was filled with a mixture of sadness and guilt. He felt helpless, unable to ease her pain, unable to restore her to her former self. He also felt guilty for not being able to spend more time with her, for being caught up in his own life and his own struggles. Sarah, however, saw Halima's decline as an increasing burden. She resented the time and energy required to care for her, the constant demands on her attention, and the disruption to her own life. She began to complain to Maruf, expressing her frustration, her exhaustion, and her resentment. She would make snide remarks about Halima, criticize her forgetfulness, and complain about her messiness. She also started to neglect Halima's needs. She would forget to give her medication, she would leave her alone for hours, and she would sometimes refuse to help her with basic tasks, such as bathing or dressing. Maruf, initially defensive of his mother, gradually began to distance himself from her. He found it too painful to witness her decline, too difficult to cope with her increasing needs. He started to spend more time at work, more time with his friends, avoiding the tense and unhappy atmosphere at home. Halima, sensing her son's withdrawal and her daughter-in-law's resentment, felt increasingly isolated and alone. She was trapped in a body that was failing her, in a mind that was betraying her, and in a home that had become a prison. She became depressed. Halima's decline is described in detail, highlighting the physical and cognitive challenges of aging and the emotional toll of grief and isolation. Sarah's increasing resentment and neglect are portrayed realistically, showing the gradual escalation of her mistreatment of Halima. Maruf's withdrawal is also a key element, demonstrating the complex dynamics of family conflict and the difficulty of balancing competing loyalties. The tension between Sarah and Halima reached a breaking point one evening. Halima, confused and disoriented, had accidentally spilled a glass of water on the living room carpet. Sarah, already stressed and exhausted from a long day at work, exploded. "You're useless," she screamed at Halima. "You're nothing but a burden. I can't take this anymore." Maruf, who had been in the kitchen, overheard the commotion and rushed into the living room. He saw his mother, cowering in her chair, her eyes filled with tears, and Sarah, standing over her, her face contorted in anger. He tried to intervene, to calm Sarah down, but she turned on him, her fury unleashed. "It's her or me, Maruf," she shouted. "I can't live like this anymore. You have to choose. Either she goes, or I go." Maruf was stunned. He had never seen Sarah so angry, so unreasonable. He had always known that she resented his mother, but he had never imagined that it would come to this. He looked at his mother, her frail body trembling, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. He looked at his wife, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing with resentment. He felt torn, trapped between his love for his mother and his commitment to his wife. He didn't know what to do, what to say. He tried to reason with Sarah, to explain that his mother was old and sick, that she needed their care and compassion. But Sarah was beyond reason. She was consumed by her own resentment, her own frustration, her own sense of being overwhelmed. "I'm serious, Maruf," she said, her voice cold and hard. "Make a choice. Her or me." Maruf, his heart breaking, felt like he had no choice. He couldn't abandon his mother, but he also couldn't bear the thought of losing his wife. He made the decision, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll find somewhere else for her to live." The ultimatum scene is a pivotal moment in the story, representing the culmination of the escalating conflict between Sarah and Halima. Sarah's anger and resentment are portrayed realistically, but without excusing her cruel behavior. Maruf's agonizing decision is presented as a moment of weakness, a failure to stand up for his mother, driven by his fear of losing his wife. The next day, Maruf, his heart heavy with guilt and shame, drove his mother to Golden Oaks Nursing Home, a facility on the outskirts of town. He had made the arrangements hastily, choosing the first available option, without properly researching the facility or considering his mother's needs. He told Halima that it was just for a short stay, a temporary respite while he and Sarah figured things out. He promised to visit her regularly, to bring her favorite things, to make sure she was comfortable. But Halima, despite her cognitive decline, sensed the truth. She saw the fear in her son's eyes, the guilt in his voice, the finality in his goodbye. She didn't argue, she didn't plead. She simply nodded, her eyes filled with a profound sadness, a silent acceptance of her fate. As Maruf drove away, he looked back at the nursing home, a large, impersonal building surrounded by manicured lawns. He saw his mother standing at the window, her small, frail figure silhouetted against the glass. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a sense of profound shame and self-loathing. He had betrayed his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had sacrificed everything for him. He had abandoned her, left her alone and vulnerable, in a strange and unfamiliar place. He tried to justify his actions, to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that he had no other choice. But deep down, he knew that he had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that would haunt him forever. The abandonment scene is described with emotional intensity, highlighting the heartbreak and betrayal felt by Halima. Maruf's guilt and shame are emphasized, underscoring the moral weight of his decision. The description of the nursing home as an impersonal and unfamiliar place reinforces Halima's isolation and vulnerability. Halima's life at Golden Oaks Nursing Home was a stark contrast to the loving and familiar environment of her home. The facility, while clean and well-maintained, was impersonal and sterile. The staff, though generally kind, were overworked and underpaid, unable to provide the individual attention and care that Halima needed. She shared a room with another elderly woman, a woman who suffered from dementia and often cried out in the night. The days were long and monotonous, filled with scheduled meals, medication rounds, and occasional activities designed to keep the residents occupied. Halima, disoriented and confused, struggled to adjust to her new surroundings. She missed her home, her son, and the familiar routines of her life. She felt lost, alone, and utterly abandoned. She would often sit by the window, staring out at the passing cars, her mind wandering back to her earlier years, to her happy marriage, to her beloved husband, to the days when her son was a loving and devoted child. She would clutch a faded photograph of Yasim and Maruf, her fingers tracing the outlines of their faces, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She would pray, silently, for strength, for guidance, for a way to make sense of her new reality. She tried to make friends with the other residents, but her cognitive decline made it difficult to form meaningful connections. She would often forget names, repeat herself, and struggle to follow conversations. Some of the residents were kind and patient, offering her companionship and support. Others were indifferent or even hostile, annoyed by her forgetfulness and her constant questions. The nursing home staff, while well-intentioned, were often too busy to provide the individual attention she craved. They would help her with her basic needs of bathing, dressing, eating, but they didn't have the time to sit and talk with her, to listen to her stories, to offer her the emotional support she desperately needed. Halima's life had become a shadow of its former self. She was a prisoner of her own failing body and mind, trapped in an unfamiliar environment, surrounded by strangers, and longing for the love and connection that had been so cruelly taken away from her. This section depicts Halima's difficult adjustment to life in the nursing home, emphasizing her isolation, loneliness, and loss of independence. The description of the facility and the staff highlights the challenges of providing adequate care for the elderly, particularly those with cognitive decline. Halima's longing for her past and her struggle to connect with others add to the emotional poignancy of the scene. Among the residents of Golden Oaks Nursing Home was an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, a man known for his troublesome behavior. He had a history of making inappropriate advances towards female residents, touching them inappropriately, and making lewd comments. The staff were aware of his behavior, but they were often short-staffed and unable to monitor him constantly. They had warned him repeatedly, but his cognitive decline made it difficult for him to understand or control his actions. Halima, in her vulnerable and confused state, became a target of Mr. Peterson's unwanted attention. He would often approach her, invading her personal space, making suggestive remarks, and attempting to touch her. Halima, despite her frailty and cognitive impairment, was deeply distressed by his behavior. She would try to push him away, to tell him to stop, but her protests were often ignored or misinterpreted. She felt violated, frightened, and utterly helpless. She didn't understand why this man was behaving this way, why he was treating her with such disrespect. She longed for the safety and protection of her home, for the loving presence of her son. She tried to tell the nursing home staff about Mr. Peterson's behavior, but her communication difficulties made it challenging for her to articulate what was happening. Her complaints were often dismissed as confusion or paranoia, attributed to her age and cognitive decline. The situation escalated, with Mr. Peterson becoming increasingly bold and persistent in his advances. Halima, trapped and terrified, felt like she had nowhere to turn. She was living in a nightmare, a constant state of fear and anxiety, with no escape in sight. The introduction of Mr. Peterson and his predatory behavior adds a disturbing and challenging element to the story. Halima's vulnerability and her inability to effectively communicate her distress are emphasized, highlighting the risks faced by elderly residents in nursing homes. The scene is set for the assault, which must be handled with extreme sensitivity. One night, Halima was awakened by a presence in her room. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding with fear, and saw Mr. Peterson standing over her bed. He was muttering incoherently, his eyes glazed over, his hands reaching out towards her. Halima tried to scream, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. She tried to push him away, but her frail body was no match for his strength. The assault that followed was brief but brutal. It was a violation, a betrayal, a moment of unspeakable horror that would forever be etched in Halima's memory. Note, the details of the assault are intentionally omitted. The focus is on Halima's fear, her helplessness, and the emotional impact of the event. This is crucial for maintaining sensitivity and respect for the elderly audience. After the assault, Mr. Peterson stumbled out of the room, leaving Halima trembling, sobbing, and utterly shattered. She lay in her bed, paralyzed by fear and shame, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She felt dirty, violated, and profoundly alone. She longed for her son, for her husband, for anyone to comfort her, to protect her, to make the nightmare go away. But there was no one. She was alone in the darkness, trapped in her own body, her mind reeling with the trauma of the assault. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by nightmares and the lingering terror of the attack. The next morning, Halima was found by a nurse during the routine medication round. She was withdrawn, unresponsive, and visibly distressed. The nurse, sensing that something was wrong, alerted the attending physician. The assault is handled with extreme sensitivity, focusing on Halima's emotional experience rather than graphic details. The aftermath of the assault emphasizes her trauma, her isolation, and her helplessness. The scene sets the stage for the discovery of the pregnancy and the ensuing events. The physician, Dr. Ramirez, examined Halima and quickly realized that something was seriously amiss. Halima was exhibiting signs of physical and emotional trauma, and her vital signs were unstable. Dr. Ramirez ordered a series of tests, including a blood test and an ultrasound. She was concerned about the possibility of internal injuries, infection, or other complications. The initial test results were inconclusive, but the ultrasound revealed something completely unexpected, something that defied medical explanation. Dr. Ramirez, her brow furrowed in disbelief, called for a second opinion. She consulted with a colleague, Dr. Lee, a specialist in geriatric medicine. Dr. Lee reviewed the ultrasound images, her eyes widening in astonishment. She confirmed Dr. Ramirez's initial assessment. It can't be, Dr. Lee stammered. It's a pregnancy. She's pregnant. A pregnancy. At the adjusted age of 65, after being assaulted by a fellow resident in a nursing home. It was unthinkable, impossible, a medical anomaly that defied all logic and reason. The news spread quickly through the nursing home staff, creating a mixture of shock, disbelief, and morbid curiosity. The nurses whispered among themselves, speculating about the circumstances, wondering how such a thing could have happened. The nursing home administrator, Mr. Johnson, was notified. He was deeply concerned, not only about Halima's well-being but also about the potential legal and reputational ramifications for the facility. He immediately launched an internal investigation, interviewing staff, reviewing security footage, and questioning Mr. Peterson, who, in his confused state, denied any wrongdoing. Mr. Johnson also contacted Maruf, informing him of the situation and requesting an urgent meeting. He knew that this news would be devastating, that it would raise a host of difficult and painful questions. The shocking discovery of Halima's pregnancy is a major turning point in the story. The reactions of the medical professionals and the nursing home administrator are portrayed realistically, highlighting the disbelief and the concern surrounding the situation. The notification of Maruf sets the stage for his confrontation with the truth and his potential reckoning with his past actions. The air is thick with confusion and the need of an explanation. Maruf, receiving the news of his mother's pregnancy, was initially incredulous. He refused to believe it, dismissing it as a mistake, a misunderstanding, a cruel joke. But when Mr. Johnson, the nursing home administrator, insisted on a meeting, and when he saw the grave expressions on the faces of the medical staff, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He rushed to the nursing home, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. He demanded to see his mother, to speak to the doctors, to understand what had happened. He was confronted with the undeniable evidence of the ultrasound images, the medical reports, the testimony of the staff. His mother, at the age of 65, was apparently pregnant. The implications of this discovery were devastating. He knew that his mother had been assaulted, that she had been violated in the very place where he had entrusted her care. He felt a surge of rage, a desire for vengeance, a profound sense of guilt and shame. He confronted Sarah, his wife, demanding answers, accusing her of negligence, of failing to protect his mother. Sarah, initially defensive, broke down in tears, admitting her resentment, her neglect, and her ultimate responsibility for what had happened. Their marriage, already strained, crumbled under the weight of this new tragedy. The trust, the love, the foundation of their relationship had been shattered. The news of Halima's pregnancy spread beyond the nursing home, reaching the local community and eventually attracting the attention of the media. The story became a sensation, a shocking and unbelievable tale that captured the public's imagination. The nursing home faced intense scrutiny, with accusations of negligence, calls for investigations, and threats of lawsuits. The staff were questioned, the residents were interviewed, and the facility's reputation was severely damaged. Maruf, overwhelmed by the media attention, the legal ramifications, and the emotional turmoil, found himself at the center of a storm. He had to deal with the police, the lawyers, the reporters, and the constant barrage of questions and accusations. He also had to face his own conscience, his own guilt, his own responsibility for the tragedy that had befallen his mother. He had abandoned her, betrayed her, and now he had to live with the consequences of his actions. The Reactions and Repercussions section explores the devastating impact of the pregnancy discovery on Maruf, Sarah, and the nursing home. The crumbling of Maruf and Sarah's marriage, the media frenzy, and the legal ramifications are all highlighted. Maruf's internal struggle with guilt and shame is a central theme. The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical examinations, legal proceedings, and media speculation. Halima, frail and confused, was transferred to a specialized hospital where she could receive the best possible care. Doctors, baffled by her apparent pregnancy, conducted numerous tests, trying to understand the biological mechanisms that could have allowed such a thing to occur. They consulted with experts from around the world, reviewing medical literature, searching for precedents, and debating possible explanations. Eventually, after a thorough examination, they discovered the truth. It was happened that she had a large abdominal growth, a tumor, a cyst that was mistaken for a pregnancy. This allows us to explore the emotional and social impact of the belief in a miraculous pregnancy, without violating medical reality. The twins are something else entirely, e.g., to smaller growths within the larger one. Maruf, when informed of the news, felt a mixture of relief and renewed grief. He was grateful that his mother's ordeal was over, but he also realized that the underlying tragedy of her abandonment, her assault, and her suffering remained. He visited Halima in the hospital, sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, and apologizing for his failures, for his betrayal, for his inability to protect her. Halima, her mind clouded by age and trauma, did not fully understand what was happening. But she recognized her son's voice, his touch, his presence. And in her eyes, Maruf saw a flicker of forgiveness, a glimmer of the unconditional love that she had always had for him. After Halima recovered, Maruf took her home. He took leave of work and sell their house. He decided to take good care of his mother and spend time with her. The story of Halima, while initially framed as a miraculous pregnancy, ultimately became a powerful testament to the importance of family, the responsibility of children to their parents, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences of neglect, the vulnerability of the elderly, and the need for compassion and respect for all. The resolution provides a sense of closure, with Maruf taking responsibility for his actions and seeking reconciliation with his mother. The miracle is debunked, but the underlying message of the story, the importance of family, and the need to care for one's elders remains strong.